I'm Dr. Selma Bartholomew. Welcome to the Dr. Selma B. Show. I'm the founder of Partner with Legacy, and I'm excited to say that we are moving into our second decade. We work to help schools become a place of purpose, passion, and innovation, primarily to end the achievement gap in mathematics. After more than a decade of doing that work and addressing and helping our schools address the challenges of transforming their culture and their learning environment, I noticed that many of those challenges that they face mirror those we face in our personal lives. I want to talk today about how to end the achievement gap in mathematics. Math is a language. I don't want to talk about closing the gap. I want to talk about how to finally end the gap. First, I want to invite you to this conversation with me because I said a very scary word, math. Oftentimes when I talk with parents and teachers and individuals, no one ever says, I can't read. But they often say, I don't like math, I didn't perform well in math, and so math creates a lot of anxieties for us as adults, but also for children. In my talk today, I want to talk about math as a language, and why is it that we need to close the achievement gap. If you noticed a few weeks ago in the election, the night of the election, there was all of this talk, but they were using graphs, they were counting votes, they were counting votes in Arizona, counting electoral votes. If you don't have an understanding of mathematics, you can't fully participate in that conversation. Even as we talk about COVID-19 and the language of flatten the curve, what does that mean in order to truly understand that from a math perspective? I find that today, you not only have to be able to do math, but you have to be able to think mathematically to learn and to succeed in our society. Why do we need to end the achievement gap in math, especially for Black children? There is no shortage of data on how Black children are performing in comparison to their white counterparts, how Hispanic children are performing, and how children who are second language learners are also performing to their counterparts. The data is stubborn. It is disheartening. And sadly, it has been that way not for 5 years, not for 10 years. It has been abysmal for decades. For decades, Black and brown children continue to fall behind and are left out of career opportunities that have a high demand for math and science, and locked out of opportunities in life. There's been tons of research around the word gap, and the latest research says that there is a 30 million word gap between children of color and those in a higher socioeconomic status. Well, that's not acceptable for me, myself, or any member of my team. We need to end that gap. Imagine if you were a first-year teacher and you walk into a pre-K or a kindergarten class. Would you feel empowered or successful if you were told, you have to teach Dwayne, who has a 30 million word gap? What we have found is that for children of color, they actually want to play with words. And so instead of thinking about the 30 million word gap, we have found that they can take one word and tell a million stories. So today, I want to talk to you about a more empowering approach. Math is a language. What I want to call your attention to is 3 pillars. The first pillar is language. Language has a structure. Our spoken language informs how we communicate and our ability to succeed in different settings, in home, in school, and professional. The second pillar is culture. And what I am advocating for is our understanding of how a child's culture influences how they learn math. And I'm separating language and culture because I might be a child who speaks French. However, if I'm a child who speaks French and I was born in Haiti, that's a different culture from a child who speaks French and who was born in Guyana or from an African country like Sierra Leone. However, I am also drawing attention to the fact that mathematics is a language in and of itself. That math as a language has a structure that is similar to English, French, coding, and any other spoken language. It has an alphabet, which includes what we know as numbers, and it also has other symbols that are also part of the math alphabet. More importantly for our discussion today, I want to call our attention to the fact that it has fragments, sentences, ideas, and big ideas. And so when we consider math in the context of a child's language and a child's culture, we are now poised to help them learn the skills that they need to communicate and in turn succeed effectively in the different environments that they have to navigate. To end the achievement gap in math, we have to now become intentional and connect language and demonstrate for our children the value of both their language and their culture. And remember, I chose this topic because it's hard. And what's hard about it is that we did not learn math this way. I didn't learn math this way. And most of our teachers did not learn math this way. We learned math much more about procedures, around memorization. And so it's hard for us to now learn how to intersect language and culture, and also to understand what does it mean to help and to define math as a language. So let's talk about how do we end the achievement gap with this approach. I'm going to start with a basic math problem, and I want you to look at it from the perspective of a child. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is identity. So the problem I want to put up is 1 + 1 = 2. That's right. See, I told you, it's a simple problem. But what does it mean from the perspective of a child? Imagine I have a child named Maria, and I'm trying to help Maria understand that 1 and 1 is 2. In Maria's everyday language, she has to come to first understand the meaning of 1 in terms of her identity. When she looks in the mirror, she has to know that she is just one person. She is a part of one family. And as she grows to come to that understanding, she also has to see that she is also part of one community. But from the child's perspective, that 1 is constantly changing. Dad comes home and he says, Maria, give me a high five. Wait a minute, am I 1 or am I 5? So as children grow and as their minds are developing, the 1 is constantly changing. And so it becomes confusing for them when we just want them to just rote and say 1 and 1 is 2. In the context of culture as well, children learn stories and they learn to define themselves through folk tales, through children's literature. Well, I'm going to be very honest with you. In the white version of storytelling, if you're Cinderella, then you're one Cinderella meets one prince, and she goes happily ever after. The two of them goes off to their kingdom. But that's not the same in everybody else's culture. If, for example, you're Native American, that's not that happy ending that you have come to know and understand. And in fact, in the Cinderella version for Native Americans, I don't want to give it away, but she does not end up in the kingdom. She ascends to the stars. So culture and language plays an important role in defining yourself and defining your identity. Now, remember I said math is a language. So the mathematician lives in the world with Maria. So as a language, this idea of identity is also a really big idea. Mathematicians go crazy when they find ones and zeros in their little workshops. Why? Well, in the math world, think about it. I have one pizza pie, and all of a sudden I can magically share it between 2 people. I could take that one pie and I could share it between 3 people. I can talk about one motorcycle, and then all of a sudden I could talk about one fleet of motorcycles. So you see, that problem, 1 + 1 = 2, is actually really complex. So we've gotten lost in the idea that Maria can't do the procedures, but in reality, before I can get to the procedures, I have to now spend time with the language, with the culture, and also with the language of mathematics. Interestingly, as a result of years of failure, the standards had said, you know, this problem 1 + 1 = 2, it's not rigorous. We need to make it more real world. So if you take a look at the textbooks, they think, add more words to the problem, Dr. B. Well, now, as a math teacher, when you now give me a textbook with all of these word problems, the math teacher becomes even more frustrated because they think that you are now asking them to become a reading teacher. And in fact, our children are also struggling readers. So now parents become even more frustrated. So let me give you an example of the same 1 + 1, and now when you add words to it, okay? Dwayne has 1 cookie, and out of the blue, Maria gave him a cookie. How many cookies does Dwayne have? Well, let's examine that question through the lens of culture and language. Now, certainly, I've already mentioned to you all cultures have stories. But what about from the perspective of language? You might think that this question is actually about Dwayne, where in reality, this question is really about Maria. Maria, you don't like cookies? Because out of the blue, you decided to give Dwayne your cookie. You see, out of the blue is where the kids are going to struggle with. So if we get lost in the procedures of 1 + 1 = 2, we miss the opportunities to address how language is playing out in that problem. Because Dwayne has 1 cookie, out of the blue, Maria decides to give Dwayne a cookie. We might think that our students are struggling with the 1 + 1 = 2, but in reality, out of the blue is a structure in the English language. It's an idiom. So I have to spend time with kids having this conversation about, out of the blue, it's a surprise. Maria surprised Dwayne and decided to give him a cookie. The other piece that I'm addressing in this context of language is breath. Notice I didn't say, Dwayne has a cookie and out of the blue Maria gave him a cookie. Breath is something that is never addressed in our textbooks, but it is part of language development. You have to know when to breathe, how to breathe, and the breath allows us to do something else that benefits us in real life. It allows us to ask for help as we're engaging in problem solving, whether that problem requires an understanding of the math or whether that problem is something much more about what we're dealing with on a personal scale in life. What most kids might say to this when you're now trying to get them to agree that 1 + 1 is 2, what most children say is, "What's this good for? Why do you keep asking me to keep coming back and doing this rote and procedural type things?" That question often shuts down our teachers and also for parents. And we tell them, just do the math. I promise when you get older, you'll benefit from it. You'll love it. You'll find out why you need it. Well, in reality, that question offers us an opportunity as well. What is this good for? Well, let's look at it from Maria's perspective. If Maria, out of the blue, decides to give Dwayne a cookie, tomorrow Maria can say, "Hey, Dwayne, are you going to drink that juice? Can I have that juice?" So Maria is calculating if she's adding value to Dwayne, and how can she now begin to form that relationship, right? Yes, we know Dwayne is going to end up with 2 cookies, but Maria is calculating and determining, hey, I have something of value, and I can give you something of value, or we can exchange. And that's really what math is for in our everyday life. How much is this good for? That's what the stock market is built on. That's what our entire system of commodities and goods and exchange are built on. What's this good for? So as we think about math and as we think about it being a language and using language and culture, we can't just get lost in just doing the rote mathematics. We have to think about how that connects to our everyday. The final piece of this, which is really important to me, is if it's a language and if I live in this society that has a culture, then it's also about relationships. So just as Maria is looking to build a relationship with Dwayne by giving him a cookie, Dwayne also has to decide, wait a minute now, yeah, I have 2 cookies, but is this now a relationship of friendship that I'm going to have with Maria? Is she being generous to me? Is she being kind to me? Or will she want something later on? So he has to understand the value of what he now has and to now make some decisions about the relationships that he wants to now have with Maria, who just gave him a cookie. Now I can then finally now talk about the mathematics, right? Because I've spent time with the kids having this conversation about value, about why you're doing something, and also the structure of the problem. So in order to build our children's fluency and their competence in numeracy and in number sense, we've often just gotten lost in the procedures. You must know 1 + 1 is 2. But in reality, what I'm showing is that we need to help our students have a context for the problem, and how you begin to help them to make sense of a math problem is to give them this connection of the structure of the language and to begin to make those connections to the value of doing the mathematics. What's the relationships? What's in this for me as I begin to make inferences and develop those habits of mind? So if we truly want to get to the point where we no longer have children failing, we have to now embrace a culture and we have to embrace their language, because it's also a sign of respect and integrity. And history tells us that language is often stripped away. It was almost reformatory discipline. You had no choice about whether or not you learned English or not. But language can also be used to isolate. There are communities where people are not supported or motivated to learn the dominant language, and so they remain insular. So for us, as we think about our Black and brown children, this culture that they can't do math is entrenched in that mindset, which has kept them out of mainstream and has denied them access to careers, access to opportunity, because they're being denied the opportunity to benefit from the universal language of this world, which in reality is math. Language has the power to create more openness. Inherently, it says that there's a desire for friendship rather than dominance. For our underserved students, this approach is far more empowering. For Black and brown children, the spoken word is rooted in African history. I was amazed when I traveled to West Africa for the first time. I went to Ghana, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, and what I found were children who could speak 5 and 6 languages fluently with no formal education. Black children love to play with words. I grew up in Harlem, and the birth of rap was on Sugar Hill on 145th Street. Today, rap is a billion-dollar industry, and no one has honored for our children how they love to play with words, and how is it that they're able to take one word and come up with so many stories. Teachers tell me things like, our kids don't know how to tell time. But wait a minute, they say things like, you're mad late. They don't know how to count. But they say things like, Dr. B, you're talking loud, I hope you bought some cash. So there's no integration of their strengths in the curriculum. And in reality, their strength is language. And they're able to now understand academic vocabulary that we need them to know in math if we're not able to connect the culture, the structure of language, and also to help them to make sense of the mathematics using their culture. So we spend time with our kids talking about their math autobiography and them writing their story and using their voice and their words and their power to be able to make sense of the mathematics. We're the only company in the world that has spent time on building a math notebook. That's right, a math notebook. And the reason why is because first, we observed that oftentimes in math class, the work would just end up on the floor. And it's just a representation of how our students were really feeling about their learning and what they were achieving in mathematics. The design of our notebook and the approach of our notebook addresses some key areas. First, it begins by talking to students and helping them to define their identity. It asks them things like, what's your superpower? What are the things that your friend would find most valuable about you? And they get a time to just develop this habit of mind of reflecting on who they are and reflecting on their progress and their growth in math class, and also as a student and a learner, and as a child, as a son or as a daughter throughout the year. Most importantly, in our legacy math notebook, we address the problem-solving strategies. And the reason for that is because we know that how I learned math and how you learned math and our teachers learned math was that it was more about the rote and the procedures. But in reality, that's not what life is really about, is it? I mean, after all, when you have a problem, don't you ask for help? If you're thinking about buying a house, don't you create a table and make a chart about, okay, well, I have this income and I need to be able to come up with a roadmap for it. When we also have problems in life, we need to look at patterns and we need to look at the patterns of our behavior. So these are in reality the problem-solving strategies, and those are addressed in the curriculum in a very disjointed way. And for most classrooms, they might do guess and check or work backwards and this emphasis on algebra, but they don't see that there is a collection of problem-solving strategies that our students need to know. And most importantly, they need to know it in both contexts. They need to know, how is it that I can use a problem-solving strategy in my everyday life? And how is it that the problem-solving strategies help me to better understand the mathematics and to become more fluent in math? So if you're a parent or an educator and you're tired of the failure and the language of failure and that deficit thinking around our children in the context of mathematics, what I'm saying to you is our approach must shift. We must first begin to really focus on who our students are and their strengths. We have to help them to know their identity, know who they are, and to help them to first begin to tell their story. We must also know the culture that our kids are existing in. And so we have to begin to integrate storytelling in their everyday lives so that they begin to see the value of mathematics and the intrinsic value of not just doing math, but how does math help them to function, to become more functional in their world and in a broader society. Saying thanks is not the same as giving thanks, and I give thanks for you. Thank you for taking the time today to engage with me on a topic that is near and dear to my heart: how to end the achievement gap in mathematics. If you want to learn more about our work and our approach and about our Legacy Math Notebook, please visit our webpage at partnerwithlegacy.com or tutors.partnerwithlegacy.com. I appreciate you sharing and, of course, showing Dr. V some love by liking and subscribing to our channel.